My rivalry with Ethan Croft was ratings gold, but when a DNA test on live TV revealed we were identical twins, it shattered our worlds and exposed a monster from our past. The air backstage tasted like stale coffee and desperation. Under the buzz of the fluorescent lights, I paced a small, worn patch of linoleum, trying to ignore the man sitting across the room. Ethan Croft, the human equivalent of a popped collar on a polo shirt. He was leaned back in his chair, feet up on a roadie case, scrolling through his phone with that infuriatingly smug smirk he always wore. He probably assumed he had this in the bag. He always assumed everything was his for the taking. For the last 3 months, he'd been the thorn in my side, the condescending rival, the one obstacle between me and a $250,000 investment that would change my family's life forever. This was it. The live finale of The Launchpad, the country's most cutthroat reality show for entrepreneurs. I was the underdog, the kid from the wrong side of the tracks with a revolutionary app for community-based aid. He was the legacy, the son of a tech mogul with a slick, well-funded, and utterly soulless social media platform. From the moment we met in the audition room, it was like oil and water. He saw my worn-out shoes and my passion and called it unpolished. I saw his inherited confidence and his team of consultants and called it cheating. Our rivalry had become the central drama of the season. The producers loved it, splicing together our arguments, our backhanded comments, our glares across the boardroom table. They'd even caught the time he accidentally reformatted my presentation thumb drive minutes before I went on stage. I'd recovered, barely, by pitching from memory, my voice shaking with adrenaline and pure rage. That was the night America decided I was the hero and he was the villain. Ratings soared. But this week, the producers had wanted something more. For finale week, they'd introduced a new segment, Legacy Lane. They'd sold it to us as a wholesome look into our pasts, a way for the audience to connect with us on a deeper level. A few weeks ago, a perky intern with a clipboard had cornered each of us. "For the Ancestry segment," she'd chirped, handing us a DNA kit. "We're going to trace your roots and see where that entrepreneurial spirit comes from. It'll be fun." It felt like a cheesy, invasive gimmick, but participation was mandatory. I'd spat in the little tube, sealed it, and promptly forgotten all about it. My legacy was simple. A single mom who worked 2 jobs, a cramped apartment, and a mountain of determination. I didn't need a DNA test to tell me that. I was sure Ethan's would trace back to the Mayflower or some robber baron from the Gilded Age. "Alex! Ethan, you're on in 5!" a floor manager yelled, poking his head into the room. Ethan snapped his phone shut and stood up, smoothing down his ridiculously expensive suit. He shot me a look, a mix of contempt and feigned boredom. "Try not to cry on stage this time, Miller." "It's unbecoming." I just clenched my jaw and walked past him, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound of the live audience was a dull roar on the other side of the door, a sea of faceless people who would decide my fate. We stepped into the wings, the heat of the stage lights washing over us. And there he was, the man himself. Steve Harvey, sharp as a razor in a shimmering teal suit, commanding the stage with that million-watt smile. "Welcome back to the Launchpad finale," he boomed, his voice filling the studio. "We've got our 2 finalists here, folks." On my right, the polished prodigy, Ethan Croft. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "And on my left, the people's champion, Alex Miller." The roar was deafening. It sent a jolt of electricity through me. We took our places on opposite sides of Steve. He launched into his usual charismatic banter, recapping our journey, playing a sizzle reel of our clashes and triumphs. It was all a blur of sound and light until he got to the new segment. All right, Steve said, his tone shifting slightly. We all know these two young men are fierce competitors. They've fought tooth and nail to get here. But tonight, before they make their final pitch for that life-changing investment, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a walk down Legacy Lane. A cheesy graphic flashed on the giant screen behind us. Ethan rolled his eyes. I just stood there, my hands sweating, wanting this to be over so I could get to my pitch. Now, Steve continued, turning to us, a few weeks ago, we had both of you submit DNA for a little ancestry research. We thought, we'd find out you're a little Irish, he's a little German, have a good laugh. But folks, he paused, letting the drama hang in the air. Sometimes you go digging for a little dirt, and you end up striking something much, much deeper. My stomach tightened. This felt off. The way he was looking at us wasn't his usual playful TV host gaze. It was heavy, serious. I glanced at Ethan. Even his smug composure was starting to crack. He looked genuinely confused. Just then, a producer, a severe-looking woman with a headset and a clipboard, walked out from the wings. She didn't look at the audience. Her eyes were fixed on Steve. She walked right up to him and handed him a thick 9x12 manila envelope. It was sealed with a dramatic red wax stamp bearing the show's logo. The camera zoomed in on it. Steve took the envelope, thanking her quietly. He held it up for the audience to see. In this envelope, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, are the results of those DNA tests. And a little extra genealogical research we did. He looked from me to Ethan and back again. For the first time all night, his signature smile was completely gone. It was replaced by something else. Pity? Disbelief? Now, we dug into your pasts, thinking we'd find some interesting tidbits for the audience, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. But what we found? Well, it's bigger than this show. It's bigger than the money. He looked over at Ethan. It's going to change both of your lives. Forever, my blood ran cold. The roar of the crowd faded into a dull hum. The world narrowed to that envelope in his hands. What could possibly be in there? Some long-lost criminal relative? A scandalous family secret? Steve looked directly into the main camera. You see, these two men who have spent the last 3 months as the bitterest of rivals share more than just a stage tonight. His thumb slid under the flap of the envelope. The sharp, tearing sound of paper was the only thing I could hear over the blood pounding in my ears. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, his eyes scanning it quickly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and then looked out at the silent, waiting audience. It felt like every single person in America was holding their breath with me. We all have a story, Steve began, his voice low and resonant. A story of where we come from. Some stories are simple, some are complicated, some are a mystery. Alex, he said, turning his full attention to me. My name sounded strange, like a word from a foreign language. You were raised by your mother, Sarah Miller. A wonderful woman, from everything we've learned. Worked her fingers to the bone to give you a shot. But you never knew your father. She told you he was a good man who died before you were born. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. It was the story of my life, the one I'd repeated 1,000 times, the bedrock of my identity. "Ethan," he said, swiveling toward him, "you were raised by Richard and Eleanor Croft, a pillar of the tech community. You've had every advantage, a powerful present father to guide you." Ethan's brow was furrowed. The smugness was gone, replaced by a wary confusion. "What is this?" he muttered, just loud enough for his microphone to pick it up. Steve ignored him, looking back and forth between us. "You two have walked completely different paths. One of you had nothing, the other had everything. You've become symbols of two different Americas. But your paths, they didn't just cross here on the launch pad. They started at the exact same place." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. What did he mean? A shared hometown we didn't know about? A distant ancestor 100 years ago? "The DNA results came back," Steve said, finally getting to the point. "And the lab called us immediately. They said the samples showed a 99.999% probability that you two share the same father." A collective gasp swept through the studio audience. It was a physical force, a wave of shock that washed over the stage. Ethan stumbled back a step, his face pale. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. That's a lie. My father is Richard Croft." My world tilted. It was like the floor had dropped out from under me. Same father? Me and him? The man I despised more than anyone on the planet? All I could see was my mom's tired face, her telling me my father was a hero who died young. It was all a lie. The entire foundation of my life was a lie. My rivalry with Ethan, the deep-seated hatred I felt for him and everything he represented. What was it now? A sick family feud? A joke? "We thought it was just that," Steve said, his expression somber. "That you were half-brothers. A shocking enough story on its own. But we kept digging. Because something else in the DNA report stood out. Something so rare, our genealogists had to check it 3 times. He reached back into the envelope and pulled out 2 documents. He held them up. They looked like birth certificates. "Alex Miller," he read, holding up one. "Born August 12th, 1996 at St. Mary's General Hospital. Mother, Sarah Miller. Father, unlisted." Then he held up the other. "And this one? This is a copy of the original sealed record. Ethan Croft, born August 12th, 1996, at St. Mary's General Hospital. Mother, listed as Eleanor Croft, but the DNA says otherwise." He looked at Ethan, his eyes full of sympathy. "Your DNA does not match Eleanor Croft's. It does, however, match Sarah Miller's." The studio was in absolute chaos. People were shouting, screaming. I couldn't process the words. "Same mother? Same birthday?" Ethan was staring at me, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. The smug, arrogant rival was gone. In his place was a terrified stranger who looked like me. Under the different haircut and the expensive suit, we had the same eyes, the same jawline. How had I never seen it before? "It's not just that you're brothers," Steve said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Gentlemen, you're identical twins. Separated at birth, I think I stopped breathing. The lights of the studio seemed to pulse, to close in on me. Twins." The word echoed in the sudden ringing silence of my mind. My entire life, my struggle, my identity as the sole focus of my mother's world, it all shattered. There was another me, And he had been living the life I'd only dreamed of, while I fought for scraps. And my mother, our mother, had given him away, or had me taken from her. I didn't know which was worse. "But that still leaves one question, doesn't it?" Steve said, his voice pulling me back from the brink. "Who is your father?" He looked at Ethan. "It's not Richard Croft." He looked at me. "And he wasn't a hero who died young." He reached into the envelope one last time. This time he pulled out a photograph, a glossy 8x10. "Our team worked around the clock. We found him. Your biological father." My heart stopped. This was it. The face of the man who created us. The ghost who had haunted my entire life. I braced myself. Steve turned the photo around so the cameras and we could see. It was a man in his late 50s with a weathered face, cold eyes, and a thin, cruel smile. I'd never seen him before in my life. He was a complete stranger. But beside me, Ethan made a choked, gasping sound. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He stared at the picture not with confusion, but with utter, soul-shaking terror. "No," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking, filled with a dread so profound it chilled me to the bone. "No, that's impossible." Steve looked at him, his expression grave. "You know him, son?" Ethan couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from the photograph. He looked like he'd just seen the devil himself. He just shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. That's the man who destroyed my family." The floor manager was screaming into his headset. In the audience, a woman fainted. The live broadcast cut to a commercial break, the show's upbeat jingle sounding like a twisted carnival tune playing at a funeral. The moment the red camera light blinked off, the stage was swarmed. Producers, assistants, and a couple of guys who looked like on-site paramedics rushed towards us. Someone was trying to hand me a bottle of water, but my hands were shaking too badly to take it. Ethan had collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over again like a mantra. Steve Harvey, his TV persona gone, looked 10 years older. He knelt beside Ethan's chair. "Son, are you all right?" "Who is that man?" Ethan looked up, his face a mask of grief and fear. "He called himself Marcus Thorne. He was my father's business partner, Richard's partner." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, as if I could somehow make sense of this nightmare. "About 10 years ago, Thorne embezzled millions from the company. He bankrupted hundreds of investors, framed my father for it, and disappeared. The stress of the trial, the public humiliation, it gave my dad a massive heart attack. He died thinking his best friend had destroyed him. My mother, Eleanor, she's never been the same." The story hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Marcus Thorne, our father. A monster who hadn't just abandoned us, but who had resurfaced years later to annihilate the family that had taken one of us in. It was a story so dark, so grotesquely cinematic. It felt like something ripped from a movie script, not my life. I looked from the photo of this smiling predator to the broken man who was apparently my identical twin brother. The hatred that had fueled me for months had evaporated, replaced by a bewildering, hollow ache. His family wasn't the enemy. They were victims. His father, Richard Croft, the man I had painted as a corporate overlord who handed everything to his son, had been a victim too. He'd raised one of Marcus Thorne's sons as his own, only to be destroyed by him in the end. The irony was so bitter it burned my throat. A producer, the same severe woman from before, finally took charge. "Get them backstage. Now." No one talks to them. No Press 2 security guards flanked us, gently guiding us away from the chaos. We were led down a long, sterile hallway to a small, windowless room labeled VIP Green Room. It contained nothing but a leather couch, a coffee table, and a box of tissues. The door clicked shut behind us, leaving us in an unnerving silence broken only by Ethan's ragged breathing. For a long minute, we just existed in the same space, two strangers who had shared a womb. We were reflections of each other, distorted by circumstance. I was him with rougher hands and cheaper clothes. He was me with a lifetime of advantages that had just been revealed as a gilded cage built on lies. Finally, I spoke. My voice was hoarse. "Your mother, Eleanor, she knew that you weren't hers?" Ethan shook his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. She always loved me. I was her whole world after my dad died, but she was always fragile, sad. I thought it was because of what Thorne did, but now—" He trailed off, the implication hanging between us. Had she been living with this secret, this lie, for 25 years? And what about my mom? Sarah Miller, my rock, my hero. She had lied to me my entire life. She'd let me believe my father was a dead hero instead of a living villain. And she'd given up my brother. Or had he been stolen? The questions swirled in my head, making me dizzy. "My mother," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "I have to call her." I pulled out my phone. My hands were still trembling. I had 13 missed calls, all from her. She must have been watching. Of course she was watching. I pressed her number. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded voice was a cruel joke. "Hi, you've reached Sarah? Leave a message." I tried again. Voicemail, and again. Voicemail. A cold dread, colder than anything I'd felt on stage, began to creep up my spine. This wasn't like her. Not tonight. Not after all of this was revealed to the world. She would be desperate to talk to me, to explain. Unless she couldn't. Ethan seemed to sense my rising panic. "What's wrong?" "She's not answering," I said, my voice tight. "She always answers." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. My heart leaped, thinking it was her, borrowing someone's phone. I opened it. The message wasn't from my mom. It was a single sentence, cold and precise, with no punctuation. "Stop looking for your mother." My blood turned to ice. It couldn't be. It was a prank. Someone from the show, a sick fan who got my number. It had to be. Then a second message came through from the same number. This time it was a picture. It was a grainy, low-light photo, but the subject was unmistakable. It was my mother's front door, the simple blue-painted door of our small apartment, the one I'd walked through every day of my life. But now it was splintered, hanging crookedly off one hinge. The lock was shattered. It had been kicked in. I stared at the picture, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked up at Ethan, my face a canvas of pure terror. I couldn't form the words, so I just turned the phone around, showing him the screen. He saw the words first, then the picture of the broken door. The last vestiges of color drained from his face. He understood immediately. This wasn't a prank. Our father, Marcus Thorne, the man who had disappeared 10 years ago. He wasn't gone. He was watching. And now that his secrets were being broadcast to the entire world, he was doing what he did best. He was cleaning up loose ends. And my mother was the biggest one of all. "Call the police," Ethan said, his voice a low, urgent command. He was already on his feet, his mind, sharpened by a lifetime of crisis management, kicking into gear. "Call 911. Tell them a potential kidnapping. Give them the address. I'll call my mother's head of security." For a second, I was frozen. Head of security? It was a glimpse into a world so foreign it might as well have been on another planet. But the shock jolted me into action. I dialed 911, my voice cracking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher, the TV show, the reveal, the threatening text, the photo. It sounded insane, and I knew it, but the chilling gravity in my tone must have cut through. They promised to dispatch a unit to her address immediately. As I hung up, Ethan was finishing his own call. "Frank is on his way. He's ex-Mossad. He's the best. He'll meet the police there." He looked at me, his eyes clear and focused. The frightened boy was gone, replaced by a man with a plan. "We need to get out of here. The studio has us on lockdown, but Frank has connections. We're not waiting for permission." He was right. We were pawns in the network's drama, but this was our reality. 10 minutes later, a side door to the studio lot hissed open. A tall, grim-faced man in a dark suit, Frank, nodded at Ethan and ushered us into a black SUV that was idling silently in the alley. The ride to my apartment was a blur of flashing lights and suffocating tension. My leg bounced uncontrollably. Ethan was silent beside me, staring out the window, his jaw set. We weren't rivals anymore. We weren't even just brothers. We were two sons, united by the same terrifying fear for our mother. We arrived to a scene of controlled chaos. 2 police cars were parked haphazardly, their lights painting the drab apartment building in strobing reds and blues. Frank was already there, speaking with a uniformed officer. As we rushed up, the officer turned to us. "The apartment's clear," he said, his tone professional but grim. "No sign of forced entry on Ms. Miller, but there are definite signs of a struggle. Her purse is here, phone is on the floor, smashed. Looks like someone took her in a hurry." My knees felt weak. Took her. The words confirmed my deepest fear. Marcus Thorne had her. "But we found this," the officer added, holding up a small, evidence-bagged piece of paper. It was a cocktail napkin from a bar called the Black Orchid. On it, a single word was scribbled in what I recognized as my mother's handwriting. "Argentum." "Argentum?" I said, clueless. "What does that mean?" Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes widened. "Argentum. It's Latin for silver. Silver thorn. It was the name of Richard Croft's first big project. It was a series of luxury waterfront warehouses down by the old marina. Thorne designed them. He named them. It was his signature project before he didn't need to finish, before he destroyed everything. He must own one of them." Hiding in plain sight, Frank was already on his phone, relaying the information. Within minutes, we had an address. It was a derelict section of the waterfront, scheduled for demolition, the perfect place to disappear. The police insisted we stay behind, but Frank gave a subtle nod to Ethan. We got back into the SUV. There was no way we were letting them go without us. The warehouse loomed out of the darkness, a skeletal silhouette against the night sky. The tactical team moved in first, silent and efficient. We waited in the SUV, the minutes stretching into an eternity. Then a single muffled shout cut through the night, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Frank's radio crackled to life. "Suspect apprehended. We have the hostage. She's safe." Relief washed over me so powerfully I thought I would pass out. Ethan let out a shuddering breath beside me. A few moments later, the warehouse doors slid open. 2 officers were escorting a man in handcuffs. It was him, Marcus Thorne. In the flesh, he looked smaller, more pathetic than in the photo. His cruel smile was gone, replaced by a sullen sneer. As they led him past our car, his cold eyes met mine, then Ethan's. There was no recognition, no remorse, just empty, chilling indifference. Then I saw her, my mom. Wrapped in a paramedic's blanket, she looked pale and shaken, but she was walking on her own. I burst out of the car and ran to her, wrapping her in a hug so tight I was afraid I'd break her. She clung to me, sobbing my name. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she whispered into my shoulder. "I was so scared. I wanted to tell you for so long." Over her shoulder, I saw Ethan approaching slowly, hesitantly. He looked like a lost child. My mom saw him, and her breath hitched. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the son she hadn't seen in 25 years. The full story came out over the next few hours at the police station. My mom, young and alone, had been swept off her feet by the charming, ambitious Marcus Thorne. When she got pregnant, he vanished. Devastated and broke, she gave birth to twins. She was overwhelmed, suffering from postpartum depression, when a private adoption lawyer approached her on Thorne's behalf. He'd told her a wealthy, loving couple, the Crofts, could only have one child. He'd paid her, coerced her, and convinced her it was the only way to give both her sons a good life. She gave up Ethan, believing it was an act of love, a secret she carried like a stone in her heart every single day. She had faked my father's death to protect me from the truth of a man who had wanted me discarded. Eleanor Croft arrived at the station, a whirlwind of elegance and raw panic. She and Ethan embraced, a lifetime of unspoken questions passing between them. Then she turned to my mom. The 2 women, from 2 different worlds, bound by the same man's deceit and the same love for their sons, simply looked at each other and wept. The competition, the $250,000 prize, it all felt like a lifetime ago. The show's producers, smelling the ratings of a lifetime, offered us a joint victory. We accepted, not for the money, but because it felt right. We used the investment to merge our ideas, Ethan's platform and my community aid app. We created a new foundation, the Argentum Project, dedicated to helping single parents and reuniting families torn apart by circumstance. Our 2 families, forged in lies and trauma, began to heal. It wasn't easy. There were awkward dinners, tearful conversations, and 25 years of history to unpack. But for the first time I had a brother. My mom had both her sons, and Ethan, he finally had the truth. We were no longer the underdog and the prodigy, the hero and the villain. We were just Alex and Ethan, and we were finally starting over, together.